You're listening to Everything Out There with your host, Steve Stockton.
Hello, friends. Steve Stockton here with you. Welcome to Everything Out There, a captivating radio show that delves into the mysterious world of the paranormal, supernatural, hauntings, cryptids, and folklore. Join me as I guide you on an extraordinary journey through the unexplained and the unknown. Each episode of Everything Out There will unravel thrilling tales and first-hand accounts of encounters with ghosts, poltergeists, and otherworldly phenomena. Together, we'll explore haunted locations, recount spine-chilling encounters, and dive deep into the history and folklore behind these enigmatic specters. But it doesn't stop there. I'll also introduce you to the realm of cryptids, creatures that dwell in the shadows and elude scientific explanation. From the legendary Loch Ness Monster to the elusive Bigfoot, I'll bring you eyewitness testimonies, expert analysis, and tantalizing theories that challenge conventional wisdom. Furthermore, Everything Out There will explore the rich tapestry of folklore from around the world. Together, we'll uncover age-old legends, mythical creatures, and ancient traditions that continue to shape our beliefs and fuel our fascination with the supernatural. Prepare to be enthralled by spine-tingling stories, thought-provoking discussions, and a captivating blend of skepticism and belief. Everything Out There is your gateway to the extraordinary, where the boundaries of reality blur and truths lie just beyond reach. Tune in every week and join me as we venture through everything out there to unravel the mysteries that lie dormant in the shadows. Tonight, talking Southern Gothic, growing up in the Southern Appalachia. Nestled within the scenic majesty of the Appalachian Mountains lies a region known for its captivating beauty, rich cultural heritage, and a distinct way of life. Growing up in Southern Appalachia is a transformative experience, shaped by the harmonious blend of nature's grandeur, resilient communities, and a deep-rooted connection to the land. This episode delves into the multifaceted aspects of the supernatural in Southern Appalachia, exploring the profound impact of its landscape, cultural traditions, and the indomitable spirit of its residents. Southern Appalachia's landscapes are a tapestry of awe-inspiring mountains, verdant forests, cascading waterfalls, and meandering rivers. Now, when I was growing up amidst such natural splendor, it fostered a deep appreciation for the environment. When I was a child, we were encouraged to explore the wilderness, which forged a profound connection with the land. From hiking and camping to fishing and horseback riding, these experiences instilled a sense of adventure, self-reliance, and enduring love for the outdoors. Now, Southern Appalachia is renowned for its tight-knit communities where neighborly support and genuine camaraderie prevail. Growing up here meant being immersed in a culture that values kinship, hospitality, and the collective well-being of its residents. Family ties run deep, and generations often dwell in close proximity, fostering intergenerational wisdom, folklore, superstition, along with a strong sense of identity. This communal fabric offers a nurturing and safe environment for children to grow, learn, and explore their potential. Now, Southern Appalachia is a repository of vibrant cultural traditions that have been preserved and celebrated for generations. From traditional music and storytelling to crafts like quilting and carving, these customs reflect the region's history and the resilience of its people. Growing up in Southern Appalachia provided me a rich cultural tapestry, where I learned the value of my heritage and the importance of oral history, and yes, superstition, storytelling, and the preservation of treasured traditions. Despite the region's undeniable charm, growing up in Southern Appalachia also entailed facing certain challenges. The area has historically suffered from economic hardship, limited access to quality education and healthcare, and a lack of infrastructure. However, these adversities instilled resilience, resourcefulness, and an unyielding spirit. The sense of community and perseverance in the face of adversity have empowered myself and other individuals to overcome challenges and work toward positive change. Growing up in Southern Appalachia was an experience that left an indelible mark on me and other individuals fortunate enough to call it home. The lessons learned amidst the mountains and rivers, the deep sense of belonging nurtured by close-knit communities, and the cultural pride instilled from childhood all contribute to the unique perspective and strength of those of us hailing from Southern Appalachia. It's a place where the harmony between nature and human existence is deeply ingrained, fostering personal growth, cultural richness, and an enduring love for the land. Now, with all that being said, there's a darker side to the Southern Appalachians, a spooky side, a scary side, one full of folklore and superstition and ghost stories, encounters with things from beyond. Now, my maternal grandmother, Mamaw, she was born in the Cades Cove area of the Great Smoky Mountains. She was what most folks would call a granny witch, or these days maybe a kitchen witch. She read tea leaves, coffee grounds, animal entrails, playing cards. She practiced phrenology. She could tell your fortune by the bumps on your head. Palmistry was also a favorite. Now, my mother's family, under the tutelage of my grandmother, were part of the spiritualism movement from around the turn of the last century. My mom, who was born in 1927, was a little girl. It wasn't unusual for them to have seances, table tapping sessions, and also used spirit boards or Ouija boards. This was the normal for my mom and my grandmother's other 9 children. She had my mother and 9 boys. Growing up in this kind of environment, it fosters an automatic belief in the supernatural, in the signs and omens, ways to tell the weather, ways to prevent bad luck, ways to bring good luck to you. Now, when I was born, I had a caul over my face, or a veil, as my mama called it. All that is the afterbirth. The amniotic sac was still stretched over my head, had to be cut away. Now, my grandmother was present at my birth. My mom was out. This was back in the day when they still used twilight sleep on women in labor. But in my granny's superstitious eyes, this condition that I was born with, which I was the only one out of a number of grandchildren, it marked me as a special child. She believed that I had gifts and abilities, second sight, if you will. Now, I can't attest to any special powers, but again, to my mama, this was special, and I was a special child. She lived in a big old Victorian farmhouse, and she had taken the formal dining room and turned it into a quilting room. It was a forbidden place for any of the grandchildren to even venture, let alone play. When visiting my grandmother, she would whisk me into this quilting room and teach me some legend or superstition. And if I could repeat it back to her satisfaction, she would reward me with a treat of some sort. Might be a Hershey bar, might be a crisp $1 bill. Back in the mid to late 60s, $1 was a lot of money for a kid. Comic books were 12 cents a piece. I could buy a stack of comic books and maybe an icy from the convenient food mart. One particular occasion, we'd gone to visit my grandmother, lived about 25 miles away. On the way there was another farmhouse we had to pass by, where tragically, years earlier, a child had chased a ball out into the road and been struck and killed by a car. There was something about this spot. Now, I knew the story. It was used as a cautionary tale, why you didn't chase a ball out into the road. But whenever we passed this particular farmhouse, I'd get a feeling, almost like a tingling sensation up my spine. On this particular evening, I was laying in the back seat of the car reading a comic book. Yes, this was the days before seatbelts were mandatory. And I felt that familiar tingle. Sure enough, I raised up and looked out the window. We were driving by that very farmhouse. I went back to my comic book. Before long, we arrived at my grandmother's house. My mom and dad was carrying stuff in. My grandmother whisked me away into the quilting room. And she was telling me one legend or a bit of folklore or another. And she asked me about feeling things. To which my 8-year-old self responded, "Yeah, I feel things. If you pinch me, I'll feel it. Or I have feelings that can get hurt." She responded, "No, I don't mean that. I mean you feel things. Like that spot on the highway on the way here tonight. My jaw hit the floor. I hadn't mentioned this to my parents. I hadn't mentioned it to her. In fact, I hadn't mentioned it to anyone at that time. Yet somehow she knew that I felt something when I passed by that farmhouse. It scared me. I thought she could read my mind. She was well known in the community for her abilities to do such things, to know things that she couldn't possibly have any way of knowing. I met a lady years later, much later in her life, that as a teenager had gone with a couple of other girls from school to have my grandmother tell their fortunes. Now, they had to walk a couple of miles to get to the dairy farm where my grandmother lived at the time. On the way there, this one lady, I'll call her Anna, she was saying to the other girls, "Well, I'll go with you, and I'll get my fortune told just for fun. But I think that old lady's crazy. I don't think she knows what she's talking about." So sure enough, they continued on their journey. They get to my Mama's house. They knock on the door. Mama came to the door, said, "Yes, may I help you?" One of the girls says, "Mama Bessie." That's what everybody in the community called her. "We're here to get our fortunes told, if you'd be so kind." She points to one of the girls and says, "I'll tell your fortune." She points to the other girl and says, "I'll tell your fortune." But she points at Anna and says, "But I won't tell your fortune. Not only do you not believe in me, but you also mocked me." Much like my 8-year-old self, Anna said her jaw flung wide open. There was no way my grandmother heard that conversation on the way there. They were a couple of miles out when those words were spoken. None of the other girls ratted her out. Yet somehow, my grandmother knew that this girl didn't believe in her, and she refused to tell her fortune. It boggles the mind. Other occasions like that, my grandma would come out with a gem. In addition to the dairy farm, they were also truck farmers. Every year, when they slaughtered hogs in the fall, my grandmother would pick out one that was her hog, she called it. And when that one was slaughtered, she would poke around in the entrails with a stick, and she would foretell what type of growing season they would have in the next year, where the corn would be good, the tobacco would be high, the tomatoes would be full. And according to my uncles, she was every bit as accurate as the Old Farmer's Almanac. Now, these were country folk. The Old Farmer's Almanac was something that they lived and died by. It hung on a nail in the kitchen and was often consulted around the supper table. Again, no explanation. Now, one of my favorite parts of going to visit Mama was late in the evening. After supper was over and the dishes put away, we'd all be sitting around in the wintertime by the fireplace. Other times, maybe in the cool of the evening on the screened-in back porch. And attention would turn to folk tales, ghost stories, superstitions, tales of signs and omens and warnings. These fascinated the young me. That was how my first book, Strange Things in the Woods, came about. Those stories sparked my imagination, went on to foster an interest in all things paranormal. I had an epiphany at my grandmother's funeral in 1976. As I observed her there in her coffin, I thought about her there in the stillness of death. And I thought about how each and every legend, every bit of folklore, every superstition she'd ever told me died right there with her. But only if I let it. It was then that I took on that mantle, that I decided to record these stories, not only from her, but from the other elders of the community. I was a late-in-life, unexpected baby. My parents and their friends were usually the age of my friends' grandparents. So anytime there was a lull in conversation when we were visiting folks, I'd always ask for a story, a ghost story. Did you ever see anything scary? Did you ever see anything weird? Anything that you couldn't explain? And that's how that book came about. Now I've continued this exploration of all things dark, all things supernatural, ghost stories, legends, folklore, storytelling. And that's what I want to do here with this show. I want to take you on a journey through some of these stories. Now, in the Southern Appalachians, as I mentioned earlier, you develop a kinship with the outdoors. You learn what's out there. My granny would talk about the beauty of places like Cades Cove, but she would also tell you, you don't want to get caught out after dark. There's a haint in every holler, she'd say. And she had the stories to back it up. Now, she called herself a gypsy witch. Where the gypsy part comes from, I have no idea. Like I said, her family immigrated from England, and she was born and raised in the Cades Cove area of the Great Smokies. But she embraced the witch part of it. She didn't cast spells that I know of, but she did enjoy reading cards and telling fortunes, and doing what nowadays would be called kitchen witchery. Also, in Appalachia, they were known as granny witches. They could cook up an herbal concoction, they could tell your fortune, they could help you with a good luck charm, help you take bad luck off of you. In an essay by Anna West for Appalachian Inc., she gave what is probably the most profound explanation of people like my grandmother that I've ever read. Now, this is through a decidedly female lens, but it rings true. Let me give you her words. Anna writes, quote, "We are a peculiar breed. Our roots grow deeper than the cedars, and yet we don't know precisely where or who it is that we grew from. We are a mystery as old as these hills themselves, and it doesn't take much figuring to know that we are enigmas of intentional design and destiny. God knows our names. And this we know without a doubt. I myself was always preened into believing I was a Southern child, born out of notions of gallantry and romance. But the fact is, I ain't a low-country belle, and I've never picked a shred of cotton or been to a debutante ball. We are not peaches. And these mountain women before us were not delicate flowers or distressed coquettes. In these old heirloom hills, the women are as tough as the men, and then some. There was only one person Papa was leery of, and that was Mama. No, you're not a peach. Never mind how long you thought you were or the times your daddy said so. No, you're not. You're not easily bruised fruit. The blood in our veins is laced with old magic and the secrets of the noble savants before us. We are the last of the granny witches. The old ones, the original Appalachian queens, were daughters of the Celts and the offspring of druids and medieval mavens and the natives of the old world craft, and we are their children. And although we are indeed as mysterious as these old hills, we still have that Celt and Cherokee elder magic in our bones. I've beheld divination in my grandmother's kitchen as she would foretell future events spelled out in the remnants of black tea or coffee grounds on the bottom of a common porcelain cup. With my own eyes, I've witnessed warts and scars blown clean off the skin with nothing more than a believing breath and a skyward nod towards the Maker. Those magic women, those healers of wounds and tellers of fortunes and hexcasters, never considered themselves anything but noble and proud and God-fearing, and it didn't bother them to be called a granny witch or a bee charmer or a medicine woman. These were gifts to them from the divine. And I recall bed sheets over mirrors in rooms where some tired soul had just given up the ghost. Nobody wants to be haunted forever, not even by somebody they once loved, and so they cover up the mirror so the spirit won't see themselves and linger around. Ain't a one of us needs a specter in the house. That's why Sister Brown paints her ceiling haint blue. You just never know and can never be too sure. Some folks don't know when to leave, even after they're dead. And the horseshoe hanging upright above that front door won't do a thing for the spirits, but at least your luck won't ever run out. And you do such things yourself too, and likely have never spent a juncture of a thought as to why, or from where, or who, or for what consequence. I would wager you'd never pick up a coin that's face down or cross the path of a black cat without blessing yourself, or at least thinking you're not superstitious anyway, and you convince yourself that there's no need to give that cat a second thought. And your very blood would chill when a broken clock starts tick-tick-ticking again, for you already know what that means, and it's not to tell the time. There was once many more of us, back in the old days when it seemed like God was sleeping somewhere over on the mountain, and the old ones ruled the land and fended for themselves. But that time has long gone. We must work harder to preserve our magic, for it is fading into the background noise of technology and naysayers and lawmen that tell us we are common, simple folk and feed us pills and poverty to quiet us. I fear that we are truly the last of the granny witches, the last tellers of tales, and that will be the end of our magic. Some of us have already lost it, but that old blood still courses through my veins, and perhaps you can feel it too, when the sparrow smashes against a window or the cow moves after dark. What we send out into the yonder surely comes back home to us eventually. It always has. Send out your magic. Don't be the last of your kind. We're the daughters of the Celts and the offspring of druids and medieval mavens and the natives of the old world craft. And yes, God knows your name. Tell your tales and bewitch history, just like the Mother Mountains with her ages of charm and mystery, where peaches have never grown. End quote. Now, as I said, Anna West captured the spirit of my grandmother and other granny witches, other people in Appalachia that I knew. Again, it's through a decidedly female lens, but it's the most accurate description of people like my grandmother that I've ever read. And joining me tonight on the phone from Rogersville, Tennessee, Cathida Katt Gray. How you doing tonight, Cathida?
I am doing good. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks. Appreciate you coming on, talking some spooky Southern stories here.
Glad to be here. Love talking about it. Congratulations on your show.
Thank you. Particularly the upper East Tennessee region. Now, you're north of Knoxville and kind of southwest of Johnson City in the Tri-Cities area, but a lot of spooky stuff up in that area. A lot of those little mountain communities have all kinds of strange and spooky stories. Not too far from Kingsport, which is one of my favorite places when I lived in East Tennessee. I love to visit, particularly a Sensabaugh Tunnel. Have you ever been up there?
Yeah. The last time was a few years ago.
That's one of those. There's legends that have to do with it. Now, there's 2 or 3 different ones, but the first version of Edward Sensabaugh, the man who built the tunnel in the 1920s, let a homeless man come into his home as an act of charity. And their guest tried to steal the jewelry, and Edward pulled a gun on him. The thief grabbed Edward's baby daughter, used her as a shield, and ran out of the house. He got away and then drowned the baby in the tunnel. And then another version has Edward going mad, killing his entire family and putting their bodies in the tunnel. The third version is not quite as scary, but he apparently lived to his old age, didn't die until the 1950s. And then by the time he grew old, vandals and local teens had taken to hanging out in the tunnel, and Edward wasn't happy about that, and he haunted it himself. And that kind of, if you believe that version, that began the legend of Sensabaugh Tunnel. But in my opinion, there's something supernatural there. I've never driven through the tunnel. I've driven part of the way into it and parked. And it's one of those, some people claim that if you go in there and you stop the car altogether, that it won't restart and you have to push it out. And people heard baby crying in there, approaching footsteps. And that's one of those spots, if you put baby powder or flour on your car, when you do leave, you'll find handprints on it. What was your experience there?
I went with my friend Sarah and her boyfriend at the time, and there was water dripping in the tunnel, but even ambient sound that was happening through, the water dripping, it sounded like voices up ahead of us, faint voices, and it sounded like maybe somebody was trying to talk very low and not be heard and talk to another person. And then it was quiet, like they were waiting on a response. And then we never heard a second person, but it's like they were having a conversation with somebody, and then they'd pause and wait for a reply, and they would speak again. It was the tone, just the tone of it. We thought
I've heard similar
people
things
were up
there.
ahead of us.
I've known other people that heard that too. Sounds like a low, like almost a murmuring conversation, but you only hear one side of it. And footsteps, I've heard the footsteps in there too. And the tunnel's not that long. I mean, you could see if there was somebody up ahead of you in there. You can see from one end to the other without any problem. But that whole area just feels weird. But the footsteps and the one-sided conversation, that's common.
I did not know that part. Cool. Now, my dad went there when he was younger, and I'm assuming this is part of the reason why he didn't want to take us when, we came along, me and my sister. He claims that their car that they were in, I don't know whose car it was, wouldn't start, and they heard a noise, and there was screaming, and about the time the car starts and stuff, the headlights light up the tunnel some, and I guess cast back towards the car, illuminating things, ambient light. And he says there was like a bloody handprint on the window. Now, somebody could have been pranking them, but they got out of Dodge, let's say, and years later, me and my sister wanted to go. It's like, no, we're not going there. Well, you know how two little girls can be, Dad, we want to go. Well, Dad took us. He tries tricking us, I believe, because he got scared. He climbs out of his truck. We were in a camper top in covered truck bed. He sneaks out of the front of the truck, out of his window. We could feel it shaking. We thought, what is he doing? And then it got quiet and it was still. And we're in there whispering and talking to each other. And about that time, we hear, boom. And we jump. We hit our heads on everything, elbows, you name it. We hear my dad laughing. He got out of the truck and scared us. I believe because he was scared, he wanted to leave. And if I remember correctly, I believe it took him about 3 tries to get the truck started. They didn't have any trouble getting there.
That's a common story. Now, I haven't heard about the bloody handprint. I have heard of people finding handprints on their car if you put a powder on there.
I believe somebody was probably messing with it.
Lengths that people will go to scare other people sometimes in these places. And like you said, it's usually somewhere where they've been scared, and they figure if they can talk you into going there, they want you to be scared too.
Absolutely.
There's a place just outside Oak Ridge where a guy on a motorcycle ran through a barbed wire fence and got decapitated. And supposedly there's a dirt turn out there, and if you back up in there, that your tail lights or your backup lights, you can see his head resting off in the bushes. And I went there. I was probably 9 or 10 years old, went with a friend of mine and his older sisters. And of course, they had their boyfriends in the car and things. And there was something back there in the bushes that it did indeed look like a head, and lots of screaming and stuff going on. But nobody knew we were going there. So I don't think anybody got there ahead of us and pranked us. So unless it's just somebody that sits out there and waits for people to back in there and then sticks their head up in the weeds.
There's people that would do it.
Yeah, there
just
are.
For the
and
laughs.
that's just one of the things about the South, any little community that you go into. As my grandma used to say, there's a haint in every holler. And it's true. I mean, there's so many, every little community there. There's a crybaby bridge or a white lady that walks either on the side of the road or on a bridge. Sometimes it's a man. Before we were talking about Rotherwood Mansion there in Kingsport. Now it's got a long and storied past, but on the old state highway that goes right by there, they've seen both a man and a woman walking, and some people claim they've seen them together and they were wearing wedding clothes. And that ties in with the story of Rotherwood Mansion. The man that built that, his daughter Rowena, depending on which story you hear, got married to somebody either that her father didn't care for or she wasn't happy with or something, and she tossed herself in the river right there beside the house. And it's a private residence now, but I'd gone up there one time to take some pictures, and I couldn't get very close from the road. The trees and stuff were in the way. It was in the summertime. And just down that road a little bit, there's a park, like just a little roadside park with a picnic bench and things like that. And I actually waded out into the French Broad River about waist deep, emptied my pockets, went out there with my digital cameras, one of the first, I think the first digital camera I ever had, and got some really good pictures of the side and the back of the house. And I didn't know it at the time, but according to the legend, that's where they see her ghost, either walking into the water or floating in the water there. And I was standing right in the middle of it, but it was in the daytime. But that's another creepy place. I've known people that have been inside it and say that there's sounds there and smells. Phantom smells are popular in a lot of these legends.
I've had
smell
phantom smells occur.
fresh flowers in the winter, or maybe a certain type of pipe tobacco that somebody smoked.
Yes, and cigars. People claim
cigar
that
smoke.
smell cigars because they're very distinct.
Or
and there'd be nobody in the house, in the home that smokes, or nobody had been to the house that smokes. In, quite a while.
When I lived in an old house in Portland, Oregon, it was from Victorian times in the Selwood neighborhood, and I would smell things like that there. I would smell like bread baking, and I know it wasn't any of my neighbors, but I also smelled roses in the wintertime, and I smelled tobacco smoke. And a lot of times I would hear it sound like somebody dropped a handful of change on the floor, and you could hear the coins roll and stuff. Never found anything. That's common too. I mean, it's always not an apparition or a ghostly figure. There's phantom smells and phantom noises. And one house I lived in, I would hear the door slam, and it sounded like it was coming from the kitchen. Well, there was no door to slam in the kitchen. It was a sliding glass door. And one day the landlord was over there doing something, and I said, "Did you ever hear a door slam here?" Then you couldn't figure out where it was from. And his eyes got real wide, and he looked at me and he said, "You hear it too?"
Validated your claims.
And he said, right there was a new sink unit that had been put in there, probably back in the 70s. And he said, right there where that kitchen window is, that used to be a wooden door. And he said, after we redid the kitchen and made that door a window and put in the sliding glass door, he said, a lot of times, day or night, I would hear that door slam where there is no door. I mean, it would shake the house, and no accounting for what that was. Another time I heard something crash. I thought the sliding glass door had fallen out of the frame.
Wow.
And I mean, it was that loud. I heard glass just absolutely shatter. Shook the house. Nothing. Never could find any reason for it. That was a strange house. It was built by the Army Corps of Engineers back in the 40s. And Oak Ridge was a secret city. And the basement was always creepy there. I don't know what went on in that house, but something did. Now, I think you said you've lived in a haunted house before?
Yes, and I've experienced loud door slamming, phantom smells. I believe it was built in the late 1780s, and it was a two-story house. The original barn was on the property, and we know this because inside of one of the walls, doing some repairs one day, my mom and dad came across an old photo. It wasn't really like black and white. Maybe it was supposed to be. That's what it was once upon a time, but where it had aged, it had like a brownish yellow color to it. And
might have been one of the old sepia
shape.
toned photographs. They were more brown and white than black and white.
I was trying to think of what you call those, like tintype or something. I believe maybe, I don't know if it's that old or not, but
daguerreotype, the ones that were shot on tin plates, I think.
Yeah, it was
definitely. There's some old
old
photographs out there.
And let's see, the men were all on horses. I don't know when it became a common thing to smile for the camera, but all of these fellows had just straight faces. And a few of them had on glasses, and they were like the little round glasses. A couple of them had on cowboy hats. And they had on boots. They looked fairly nicely dressed, and but it was a very old picture. They were straight-faced. They wasn't smiling. So that was a common thing to not smile for the camera way back when. So we know it's very old. But
yeah, they didn't smile for the camera back then because it took so long to expose the plate, with the flash powder and everything. And you, instead of sitting there with a smile plastered on your face, it was easier just to keep a straight face or somber face. So that's why you rarely see anybody smiling in those old photos, because sometimes they'd have to expose that plate for a minute or two with the big old wooden box cameras, the bellows, and the guy behind it with the cover over his head. So you don't see a lot of smiling faces in photos, probably
a lot of
before
people,
the turn of the last century.
A lot of people did not believe in having your picture taken. They were against it. They believed it captured your soul. It took something from you that, like basically witchcraft or something, It just wasn't.
And there's people that still feel that way. I know the Amish are like that. They don't like having their picture taken because they feel that it steals your soul. Not only that, but from a religious standpoint, you've created a graven image of somebody which they don't believe in. so therefore don't have your picture taken. A lot of Native Americans believe that too, that it stole a little bit of your soul. And then other people believe that you could almost make a voodoo doll out of a photograph. You could take it, stick pins in it, or put a curse on somebody or what have you, just from having their photograph taken.
That leads me to think of covering the mirrors upon a person's passing too. So
Yeah,
your soul
that's
doesn't
a
enter.
common practice, a superstition, particularly in the South Appalachian region in particular. That number one, they stop the clocks, and they do that to observe the time of death. But they also cover all the mirrors and open the windows so the person's spirit can leave.
Well, now just the opposite of that is the practice of scrying, where you sit alone in the dark and you stare at the mirror to see possibly see spirits or something otherworldly from the mirror. So
yeah, there's mirror scrying, and then
there's people that believe that
maternal grandmother, the one that was a self-proclaimed gypsy witch, she used a bowl of water, and she'd sit by candlelight and stare into the bowl. And that might be the same bowl that she made gravy or mashed potatoes or something. And she was like, nowadays they call her a kitchen witch. She didn't have any special instruments or tools of her trade. She just used whatever was on hand.
I made a post
that makes it even more frightening to me.
There was something about like old witches or something. I can't remember exactly how it was worded, but ladies of the past, were called witches and, things of the sort. I call it home remedies. I mean, you go out in the woods and you get you a little bit of aloe vera or, some roots and things for, I don't know if you got warts, a rash, or who knows what.
A lot of your modern medicines have at least an origin in plants and herbs and things, like component similar to what aspirin is made out of can be found in willow bark. And my dad's mother, she lived over on the Cumberland Plateau in the Jamestown area. She was an herb doctor, which was another kind of kitchen witchery, I think.
They later became...
She ran the post office, cut hair, pulled teeth, and made herbal remedies. You could get
just like the town barber. They used to do it all. That's what stripes...
When you went to visit Fanny. But have
you heard that on the stripes for the barber?
Yeah, the barber pulled the red, white, the blue, the red. They used to take tonsils, do minor surgery, cut hair, pull teeth. But,
I thought that was pretty cool, and I'd heard that. I was like, wow.
None of the barbers that I've gone to, I would want them performing surgery on me. Although I've had a couple of literal close shaves. I had a guy cut the back of my head up at one time trimming my beard.
Wrong patient. I mean, wrong haircut. Yeah.
Yeah. But one thing that was my dad's mother, that was the herb doctor. She taught him that anything that'll hurt you in nature, there's something nearby that you can treat it with. Like if you get into poison ivy, there's something that grows nearby there that you can make a poultice out of to put on that to cure the rash. If you get snake bit in the area where the snakes are, there are plants to pull that venom out. There's just all kinds of stuff like that. And these people, they didn't go to the doctor. That's absolutely necessary, especially like people like my dad's family lived out in the absolute middle of nowhere. They had a 900-acre farm literally out in the middle of nowhere that backed up to the Big South Fork. Now, Big South Fork's on the Kentucky side. They were across the river from that, but they had to go to town for supplies and stuff. They'd go maybe once a month. So they did their own doctrine. They did their own, minor ailments and things like that. And then in particular in the Southern Appalachians, people like my maternal grandmother, the granny witch, was what she was. She had cures for everything. She could take warts off of you. She could tell your fortune. She read tea leaves and coffee grounds and a little bit of everything, charms. She interpreted dreams and had a superstition for everything. There were signs and omens. A lot of that stuff you learn to pay attention to. Another one of her favorite things, they had a farm. They had a dairy farm, and then they also did truck farming. And in the fall, when they slaughtered hogs, she would pick out one hog that was hers. And when they slaughtered that one, she would poke around in its insides with some kind of stick. She could tell what was going to grow well in the next growing season. And according to my uncles, there were 9 of them. She had 10 kids. my mom and 9 boys. According to the boys, that she was every bit as accurate as the Old Farmer's Almanac. And they lived and died by that book. It hung on a nail in the kitchen. And a lot of times when they were sitting down to supper, they'd consult the Old Farmer's Almanac, and it gave you all the signs, when to plant or when to have surgery or anything like that. They followed the signs of the moon and the superstitions like that, if you want to call it even a superstition. I think there's a little bit of superstition and a little bit of just natural science or earth science in a lot of that.
She was poking at the pig with the stick. It made me think of another Southern tradition. Well, it's not really a tradition. It's a superstition, I guess. It's about as equal as groundhog seeing its shadow, which is you can tell what kind of winter it's going to be by looking at the woolly worms.
Yeah, and I saw on your Facebook the other day you had a picture of one that didn't have any black on it. Usually they're half black and red or black on each end, but that one you had was red all the way across, and I can't remember if that means it's going to be a super harsh winter or a very, very mild winter. I've forgotten the foretelling of the woolly worm there.
It was like a reddish brown. No, it was a real small, fine-haired. It was a very young one. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, or if they get any black on them as they grow. They stay the same
or not, but
I don't know.
She would tell you, if you look at the woolly worms, you could tell what kind of winter they're going to have. Another thing that they would pay attention to was hornets' nest. The closer they built to the ground, the milder the winter would be. And that makes sense. If you think about it, if they're going to have snow drifting up, the bees are going to build their nest higher up to avoid the snow. When I was a kid, we had hornets build a nest on the garage window. I'd never seen that before because they're usually up in a tree. And you could stand inside the garage and not worry about getting stung, and you could see all the inner workings of the hornet's nest and see them in there. Fascinating. I wish I had a video camera back then.
Talking about the doctors and such back in the day, I don't know, 16 to 18, late 1800s, ladies that knew how to do certain things with the roots and plants and didn't have any formal education like the doctors did of the day. They just assumed, well, it must be witchcraft. How do they know these things?
Yeah.
It's not possible. There's something, a higher power, a darker source swaying their knowledge there,
And yet it worked. I mean, they had some stuff. I think it just worked out of pure luck. My dad was telling me about when one of his sisters got the chicken pox. They brought a chicken in the house and made her lay down across the threshold of the door and ran the chicken out over. And she got over the chicken pox, but I think they're one of those things that if you just ignore it, they'll go away anyway.
Yeah.
But she was sick as could be, but had to lay on the floor while they ran a chicken over. And then there was another story my dad told me about. I don't remember. It was like, is it the measles or something like that they had? And his mom's cure for it was sheep manure tea. And it's just what it sounds like. She took some dried sheep manure, steeped it in hot water, and they had to drink it. And I asked my dad, I said, did it work? He said, oh, you bet it did. There's no way I wanted another dose, so it worked. If nothing else, out of fear, I'd have to take the medicine again.
And hope that the manure and, that concoction didn't make you ill. No, I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. You don't know what else
exactly.
You might get. You might have to swallow down.
And he said a lot of times, if you had something wrong with you, you wouldn't tell just for that, ready to go. And he said it was better just to be quiet and suffer through whatever it was in silence as to have to endure one of her medicines. But they all lived to ripe old ages, so it must have worked. She was born, I believe, in 1895. Didn't die until the 60s when I was a small child.
Now, you were her pick pretty much, and she knew that you had something. Now,
that was my maternal grandmother. She was present at my birth. Back then, they still used twilight sleep on women that were going into labor, so my mom was knocked out. Our grandmother didn't do any midwifery, but she would have. I'm surprised they were able to stop her because she had birthed a lot of babies. But she was present for my arrival, and according to her, I was born with a caul over my face. Now, that's a big thing in the South. All it is, it's the amniotic sac, the afterbirth. It was still stretched over my head, and they had to cut it away. But in her superstitious mind, that marked me as a special child, and out of all the grandchildren, and there was a lot of them. I mean, she had my mom and 9 boys. I was the only one born with that particular condition. She kept the call. I don't know what she did with it. I've heard of people framing them. I've heard of people keeping them and doing, there's things you can do with it. I don't even want to know.
It may have went into some home remedies because it's supposed to be very lucky.
That's what I was thinking. I hope she didn't make soup out of it or something, but she got it. It's
a lucky superstition to be born with a call.
But because of that, I was her favorite. And part of that superstition was believing that I had a second sight, and like she did. So she would get me alone when we go up to her house. She'd take me into her quilting room. She lived in this big old Victorian farmhouse, and what had once been a formal dining room, she turned that into her quilting room, had the whole frame set up in there and had sewing machines for putting the quilt pieces together, and then the rest of it was stitched by hand. But she would take me in there and tell me stuff, superstitions or omens or legends or lore, and then have me repeat it back to her. And if I could repeat it to her satisfaction, then I'd be rewarded. She'd give me usually a Hershey bar or sometimes a crisp new dollar bill. And back in the mid to late 60s, a dollar bill was a lot of money for a kid.
Get a
I'd
sack
stop
full
on
of
the way
stuff.
home and get a stack of comic books. Comic books were like, I think 12 or 15 cents at that time, and you could get an icy for a dime. So I'd get several comic books and a icy at the convenient food mart there on the way home.
She must have trusted you in that room. And she bought your trust too.
Yeah. It was forbidden for any of the kids, the grandkids, to go in, for anybody really to go in that
quilting room. Yeah.
But she would take me in there. And she had ways of knowing things that she shouldn't have known. She had something, I don't know, second sight, ESP, psychic ability, witchcraft, whatever she had in practice. She read cards, but she wouldn't read tarot cards. She wouldn't touch a tarot card. She said they had an evil aura about them. She had regular playing cards, but she had special symbols and things drawn on them that she chose to interpret that way. And there are cards like that, and there's actually a deck of cards called Gypsy Witch fortune-telling cards, and she had a pack of those probably from the 1920s or so. Maybe that's where she got that Gypsy Witch moniker. I'm sure there was part of them from the old country somewhere. What old country, I don't know, but when they immigrated over, they came over from England and landed in the Cades Cove area, the Smokies. A lot of strange stuff up there in that area too. The Cades Cove,
yes, it's
and
thick.
Probably the North Shore of Fontana Lake. I consider those to be among the most haunted places in the Great Smokies.
I recall, now I'll let you tell the story, I'll just remind you of, you were taking a trip, you were coming from some areas, going to your grandmother's, and there was something that happened on the road, and when you got back to the house, you felt a certain way or something about the incident that happened in the car.
Yeah, we were on the way to her house, and I remember even what we were going up there for. It was in the summertime, it was in the evening, and on the way there, it was about a 25 mile trip to her house, and on the way there was another farmhouse that sat up on a little hill, and at one time, years and years before, some kids had been playing ball there, and one of them chased the ball out into the road and got hit and killed by a car. And I would always feel weird when we drove by that spot, because it was told to me as a cautionary tale, that's why you don't chase a ball into the road. You'll end up like that kid. And one particular evening, I was laying in the back seat reading a comic book, or on the way to her house, and I felt that little tingle, and I knew we were passing by the place. Sure enough, I raised up and looked and saw the farmhouse go by where the kid had lived. Well, we get to my grandmother's. My parents are carrying stuff in. She whisked me off to the quilting room, and I don't remember what exactly the lesson was that night, but she said, you feel things. And I said, yeah, if you pinch me, it hurts, or I have feelings. And she said, no, I don't mean that. She said, you feel things, like that spot on the highway on the way here tonight.
Yeah.
And I was flabbergasted. I'm like 8 years old, and I thought, she can read my mind. But she had no way. No, I didn't mention it to anybody. I never had. I certainly didn't mention it to her, but she knew that I had felt that. And there was another story, a lady that I met much later in her life. She was probably in her 60s or 70s at the time. When she was in high school, her and a couple more girls had gone to my grandmother to get their fortunes told. They had to walk a couple of miles or more to get to where she lived at the time. That was when they had the dairy farm.
I do like this story. I've heard it. I like this one.
And on the way there, they were kind of joking and cutting up about this one particular lady. I'll call her Anna. She said, well, I'll go along with you. But she said, I think that old lady's crazy. I don't put any faith in her or anything, but I'll go just for fun and see what she has to say. And they got there. You called her Mama earlier. That's what everybody called her, Mama Bessie, everybody in the community. Well, they got there and they knocked on her door and she came to the door. And, yes, can I help you? And one of them said, Mama Bessie, we're here to get our fortunes told. And she said, okay. And she looked at him and she said, I'll tell your fortune and I'll tell your fortune. And she pointed at Anna and said, but I'm not going to tell your fortune because you don't believe in me and you mocked me.
On your way there.
She said,
she knew it.
You could
there
have
was no
knocked me
cell
over
phones
with a
then,
feather.
you know?
Because she said, we were miles away from there when I said those things. She had no way of hearing me. We just got there. Nobody ratted her out or anything, but my grandmother knew that she had mocked her and didn't believe in it. So she
no sooner and she lands on the doorstep and she looks at her, she knows. I mean, wow. I'm imagining you as a child. You see your mama doing these things with the tea leaves. You know, you don't think much of it. And then you think, wow, my mama's got some kind of power. She knows that I was just,
things, I was around it. It didn't really occur
you're just
to
a
me
witch.
that it didn't, that everybody's grandma didn't do that. Same with my mother. Now, they were a part of the spiritualism movement around the turn of the last century. My mother was born in 1927. But when she was a little girl, 4, 5, 6 years old, she remembers them having seances and table tappings and using the Ouija board, spirit board, stuff like that. And even after she got married to my dad in 1945, and he said that sometimes even then, when they'd go to visit, he sat in on one of their table tapping sessions. And he said, I walked all around that table and tried to look. He said there was nobody doing anything. Nobody had their foot under one of the table legs. Nobody was using any device.
No gimmicks.
Said, that table, it would tilt, it would raise up. And he was talking about one time they put one of the grandkids up on the table and said that old table was creaking and groaning, trying to raise up with the weight of that kid on it. But he said it beat all he had ever seen. He said they sounded like a bunch of wild heathens. They would sit around and shout, rise, table, rise on so-and-so's side for yes and this side for no. It's like pendulum dowsing or a very rudimentary Ouija board. It couldn't answer many questions. I think all it could do was yes or no. But he said, I saw it with my own eyes. Now, my dad, in addition, he was a scientist. He worked out at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, but he had some abilities too. Now, he wasn't like my grandmother's side of the family. But he was what they call a water witch or a water dowser.
Oh, okay.
He could take a willow branch and find underground water. He could also find pipes or things buried like that. I've seen him do that with a couple bent coat hangers. Now,
people still do that to this day.
Yeah.
To find whales.
The willow branch was the easiest way to find water. But after he had retired in, I think, 1980, 81, somewhere around in there, they moved into a little house in Oak Ridge, and there was some problem with the water, and the guys were there trying to find where the water pipe was. And because of the way Oak Ridge was built, it was during the war. A lot of the houses, when you pulled up to the house, you went in through the kitchen. You're actually at the back of the house. It'd be funny. You go to visit somebody, you'd walk in the house, you're in the kitchen, you walk into the living room, and this big picture window is looking at the woods behind the house. And the reason they did that, they built the back of the house facing the road to save on pipe because of the war effort. And so it took a less run of pipe if the back of the house, the bathroom and all that was on that side. But they're out there trying to find the water pipe. That house was probably built in the 1940s. And he said, here, let me help you. He took a coat hanger, cut it in half with a pair of tin snips, bent it, walked the yard a couple times. The coat hanger pieces crossed. He said, dig right here. Sure enough, they dug there. That's where the pipe was that they were looking for. And I've tried it. I can do it to some extent. I'm not as good as he was, but I can do the willow wand, he called it. But
the theory of it, I believe, is like a magnetic pull.
And there's a certain way you have to hold it. You hold it with your palms up and your thumbs kind of bent. And I tried desperately to not let the end of it point down, and it did. And I was trying to hold it up with such force that it was a green branch. It stripped the bark off in my hands because I was trying to fight it to keep it from pointing down. But it does work. I can't explain.
Instead of debunking it, for a fact it worked. You're trying to stop it from happening.
More personal proof for me.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, people still do it to this day. There's a YouTuber. He's got a Southern voice and all. He's got a video about water witches. There's other names for them too. Dowsing. And in the comments, there was tons of people that have done it to find water on their property. They tried it when they were kids. They wanted to join in and help because they thought it was cool. They would get the rods and they would move and be like, Papa, come here, dig a hole here. And sure enough, there'd be water.
Yeah.
People swear by it.
Where he grew up, there were people that they didn't. They got their water out of a creek. They lived along the creek. But they knew people that lived back over in the hills over there that had to dig a well. And that's how they had a water witch or water dowser come and tell them where to dig. There's people that can find oil wells that way. There's people that have supposedly found gold that way. In fact, there's a device called a Spanish dip needle or Spanish dipping needle that works kind of on the same principle. And some of them have a witness chamber. If you're trying to find silver or gold, you take a little bit of it, put it in the witness chamber, and then it knows what you're dowsing for. Wow. Can't prove it by me, but I've seen it work.
That, some kind of science behind that. But I think I think your childhood, it had to be pretty interesting. Your grandmother doing things she done, your dad being a man of science and having, I wouldn't say he dabbled in paranormal, but he had a foot in there, I mean, to have that,
he had seen things in the woods that he couldn't explain.
Yeah. A lot of science people are not.
And from a science perspective, he just say there's some things that can't be explained. And he talked about that in the laboratory, that sometimes, even under constrained conditions, they would have stuff happen that they couldn't get to repeat. And there used to be a magazine about that. I believe it was the Journal of Anomalous Results. And sometimes things just don't behave according to the laws of science.
Yeah. Nikola Tesla had a phrase that I like, and I can't remember word for word how it was quoted, but something to the nature of, when science starts investigating into the paranormal, they will find more evidence at that time than they have in the entire existence, the time of its entire existence. I mean, because he was such a firm believer that if they look, they will find the proof. It's everywhere. That's how firmly he believed in it.
Yeah, and Tesla was a brilliant man. They're still
Way ahead of his
finding
time.
out that a lot of his ideas actually worked.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad that he died in poverty. And I think his notes or his notebooks and things like that were stolen, probably by some shadowy government agency that didn't want that to leak out. But he's a brilliant man.
The last time I saw that phrase actually was about a week ago. And I took I took a picture with my cell phone of my television with it on there. I'm going to see if I can find it real quick. But in the meantime, I think I remember about the woolly worms. The more black they have, I think the worse the winter.
I believe that's what I remember. Sometimes they'd be about halfway, and then other times they'd be just black on the ends. But based on that one that you found, your area is going to have a mild winter this year, then, if that's the accident.
I hope so, yeah. Also, too, I do know that, sometimes you get like the lighter colored ones that are like a real bright orange or yellow, even a white one. They look like woolly worms, but they're not. They're a different type. So.
Yeah, there's all sorts of different types out there. There's some that can sting you. I found that out the hard way. There's one that gets in corn. I don't know what they're actually called, but when I was a kid, they called it a pack saddle. And it would sting the fire out of you. It was like a wasp or a bee sting or something. Very
the bristles get into you just like little bitty wires. What is that? Is it hair or fur? Their furry coating sticks in you like
looks
little
furry, but I
wires.
think it's some kind of spines or something that they grow out there. And some of them are
The-
just as
the
soft as
defense.
can be. But yeah, you don't want to mess with a pack saddle. I found that out in the cornfield as a kid.
Yeah.
And of course, they had something to put on it. First time I ever got stung by a wasp was over at my dad's mother's place. And my Uncle Tracy had a can of Prince Albert tobacco. He rolled his own cigarettes. He took some of that loose tobacco and wet it and had me hold it on that bee sting, and it did take the poison out. Now, another thing, especially back in the hills like that, you had people that they claimed could blow out fire. Like if you got burned or something, they could take that pain away from you by blowing on it. There's also people that claimed they could blow warts off of you. There was people that could staunch bleeding with a verse out of the Bible. And I can't remember what verse it was, but you had to say it while walking north, and it was supposed to
sent that to you one day.
stop bleeding. And there was a lot of that too. Even in the superstition, there was religion mixed in there too, and science. And I've said that before, that I was the perfect blend of science and superstition, and then sprang forth bewildered from those humble roots.
You got a little bit of both sides there.
And now that was amazing about my dad to grow up like he. I mean, they had dirt floors in the one place they lived in. They didn't have electricity until he was 6 years old, and they moved on to the other side of the creek. But then he moved to Knoxville, lived with his sister who had gone to nursing school, and then went to the University of Tennessee, my alma mater, and became a scientist. He worked in metallurgy out the plant, so the uranium enrichment plant. So for somebody to come from hardcore Appalachia and then at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, he'd seen some stuff.
I'm sure there's a lot of things he, failed to mention or telling what he may have known and didn't quite believe or something himself and just kept to himself.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff. Like I said, he didn't participate in the ghost stories and stuff. His family didn't, like my grandmother's family did. And that was one of my favorite times to visit. Or sometimes my parents, I was a late in life unexpected baby. 17 years difference between me and my brother. They thought they were done having babies, and then I came along. When I'd get in trouble, my dad would point out that, you were supposed to be a 63 Corvette.
Yeah.
My brother had moved out and was getting married. They thought they were, through having babies, they were going to buy a new Corvette and travel some. And then I came along. We ended up with a Chevy too, with room for a car seat. But a lot of
both sides there from your dad.
They had friends that were their age or older, and I loved it when we go and visit some of those old people that they knew. And I was quiet and polite. I had to mind my manners. But when there was a lull in the conversation, it was getting kind of late. I'd always ask, do you know any ghost stories? You ever seen anything spooky? Have you ever seen anything scary?
I was always all ears when I heard the slightest thing like that as a kid.
And that's how Strange Things in the Woods came about. I started collecting those stories as a child and had an epiphany then at my maternal grandmother's funeral. I was standing there looking at her in her coffin.
Yeah.
And she was one of those people, she was always on the move, always on the go, always doing something. And there she was, just totally in the stillness of death. And I thought, every story she ever told me, every legend, every superstition, every omen, every sign, that all dies right there with her if I let it. Because none of my other cousins were interested in any of that stuff, and she didn't have an interest in telling it to them either. And I thought, I'm going to do that. I'm going to write down all these old stories and sayings and stuff. And that's actually 2 books combined, Strange Things in the Woods, and then there's going to be a 3rd volume that I'm working on. And just due to popular demand, I'm writing a book about my grandmother and her sayings. And
I love it. I love
stuff that she told me, because there's so much. And all
you
those people who passed
because
away years ago. She died in 1976. I was 13. I wish I'd had another 13 years with her.
Yeah.
But my immediate family, they're all gone. All those kids she had, the 9 boys, in addition to my mom, I think there's one of them still living, and he probably doesn't remember, never even heard a lot of those old stories and stuff. He was the second youngest. So by the time the 2 younger kids came along, they'd kind of got out of all the spiritualism and stuff. And what really got them out of all that, the 7th child, my uncle, became a Baptist preacher And then he enlightened all of them to their heathen ways and got them all converted to Christianity, and they gave up the fortune telling and the seances and things like that.
I'm not sure. Maybe you can touch on it a little bit. Isn't there a superstition around the birth of the seventh child or the seventh son? Something.
Yeah, the seventh son is supposed to have special powers, and the seventh son of a seventh son, they're like the ultimate. They have all kinds
Chosen
of
one.
power. A lot of those people, or those are the type of people that can blow out fire and things like that. And that, for those of you that have never heard of it, like if you get a severe burn or something, these people claim the seventh son of a seventh son could blow on the afflicted area and take the pain and the fire, take the burn out of it. Now, I've never experienced it myself, but I've known people that swore that it really happened. Same with a wart. One of the ways my grandmother would get rid of warts, you take a gravel and rub on it, and then drop that gravel place where other people walked by, and then whoever came by and stepped on that gravel would get your wart. I don't know if anybody got my wart or not, but as a kid, I had a wart on my thumb. She rubbed gravel on it and told me where to go put the gravel. And the wart left and never came back. So, power suggestion.
Talking about warts, that reminds me, I better half hear Mike. He told me a story about his grandmother and a wart. And now what I'm going to say, I've also heard about using as a trick to catch fish. So take from that what you will. But the trick is to chew tobacco, take the spit, put on the wart, rub it. And I've also heard to do that, spit on your fishing lure or your bait or whatever and cast it out. But it had to be from an old lady, and you'll catch fish all day. I also have heard that Mike's mama would take a coin, I believe it's a nickel or maybe a quarter or something, and rub it on the wart. I don't know what kind of effect that would have, but it got rid of his wart.
Yeah, and again, I don't know, is it power suggestion? Is it mind over matter? Or is
The
there
blood
something
stimulation?
to it?
Yeah,
I have seen and experienced warts removed in non-medical fashion like that.
Yeah.
Who knows? And as my granny would say, whatever works. If it works, it works.
It ain't voodoo.
And she
it's
didn't
just
know.
hoodoo.
She didn't, a lot of that stuff, she didn't know how it worked. It just did. And that was all you needed to know.
Hey, if it works, it works. And if it's not hurting anyone or yourself, then there's nothing wrong with it, I don't think. I skipped past the two-story house parts there earlier. I was just
Okay,
sitting
yeah,
here
we kind of
thinking
strayed
about-
away from the ghost stories
Yeah.
there and got into superstitions and other Appalachian stuff. But yeah, if you've got a spooky story you'd like to share, please do.
Me and my sister were in bed, and when we moved in this two-story house, people vandalize things from time to time, as they ought not do. But in blue paint upstairs, don't know how they got it up where they did, because it was like way up above, right as the stairs go up. So it was like they had to put the ladder on the stairs, which is scary in itself. But it said, "Get out while you can." We're like, okay. Well, a few months later, odd things started happening. We had a cat end up inside of the wall. Don't know how it got in there. And it was, just in distress, it sounded like something was attacking it. And my dad had to put a hole in the wall to get the cat out. The cat was fine. We never did explain that. Never happened again.
Now, was it your cat or somebody else's cat?
Yeah, it was our cat. Cat got in the wall. The cat had been missing for a couple days.
They claim a cat can compress itself and get into very small spaces. And the way that the cat gauges if it can fit in there or not is by its whiskers. If its whiskers will fit in, it'll fit in. And my mom, when she was a little girl, she trimmed her cat's whiskers trying to make them look better, and it disappeared. They don't know if it ran away, if it couldn't gauge the space anymore and it got in some place it couldn't get out of. But she said in her mind that proved that. She called it old wives' tale. The cats measured spaces with their whiskers.
The cat's whiskers, that's how they can sense wind, vibration. That's why when you see them staring at a bird, wanting to hunt down a bird, their whiskers are kind of twitching. They can pick up smells and vibrations and such through their whiskers. So maybe it didn't have quite as much sensation or, I don't know, sensation or awareness because she trimmed the whiskers off, Without the whiskers,
shortly after
something.
that, it disappeared and never saw it again. So who knows? But interesting story nonetheless. And there's, particularly in the South, there's legends about cats and dogs being able to see spirits. And I've had that in one place I lived. My daughter had a cat, and the cat would sit and look at something that we couldn't see. And then likewise, when I first got Mulder, it was the house in Portland that I talked about I was living in. He would see things and that he would wag his tail at, and there was nothing there. And I
They'll
lived in
growl and
Oregon.
bark.
I saw a shadow figure come out of the laundry room, across the kitchen, and go out through the wall into what was the garage. Mulder saw it too. He didn't bark at it, didn't growl, but he wagged his tail like he saw somebody. Like it was just the figure of a person, but it was just their shadow. So who knows?
That's when people should take out their cameras, their cell phone cameras or something, if they can remember, and just see what you can get, if anything.
Another
in a
cat-related story.
Take a picture.
I was telling Nicole this morning, I went over to a friend of mine's house one time and spent the night, slept in a spare bedroom. Sometime during the night, I felt his cat come and jump up in the bed with me, curl up. And the next morning, breakfast, I said, if you were looking for your cat last night, it spent the night in the room with me. It curled up on the bed. And he said, you felt it? And I said, yeah. He said, Steve, that cat's been dead for 3 years. He said, but it still comes around. He said, in the dark, I'll feel it brush against my leg. It's jumped on my bed too. He said, it's buried out in the backyard. There's no other cat here, hadn't been. But I felt it. I mean, I felt it jump up on the bed and curl up. If you've ever had a cat jump on the bed, you know exactly what it feels like.
The depression, the warmth, the purr. That's fascinating to me. I think it is. I think it's pretty fascinating.
And I had some other cats in my past. The house I grew up in, we had that house built when I was 6 months old, but there had been another old house there, and back where our garbage pile was, back then, you could haul your garbage to the dump in either Knoxville or Oak Ridge. We lived out in extreme West Knox County. Didn't have any garbage service, and it was legal to burn your garbage if you didn't want to go to the dump. So we had a garbage pile, the little pit that my dad built where we burned our garbage. There where that garbage pit sat, at one time there'd been an old house there, and the lady that lived there was supposedly a witch. That whole area that I grew up in was just steeped in weirdness like that. But, it was my normal. I didn't know any better. But my bedroom was on the back end of that house, and I could lay on the hardwood floor and put my ear on the ground. I could hear kittens under the house. I made a video about it. And I thought, there's kittens in the crawl space. I want them. I got down there with a flashlight and crawled from one end of that crawl space to the other. There were no kittens under there. And I heard that for years. Oh. And I had a friend come over one time from school, and we were playing like Matchbox cars or something on the floor, and he listened, and then he put his ear to the floor, and he said, there's kittens under your house. And so he heard it too. Now, my dad tried to listen, and he nor my mom couldn't hear him. But I heard him often, starting from probably 6, 7 years old until the last night I spent in that house. I was 15. We had moved up the road a few miles, and part of the furniture had already been moved. Part of the stuff was still there. My mom and dad stayed in the new house, and I spent the night in the old house because part of our stuff was still there. I slept on the floor, and my last night in that house, I still heard those kittens in the crawl space. There wasn't any way for anything to get down there. My dad kept that door locked with a padlock, and it was literally a crawl space. Wasn't enough room even for a kid to stand up. You had to hunch over. And toward the back end of it, it was literally just a few inches, maybe a foot tall. Never did find those kittens, but I heard them for years. I can't explain that either.
There's certain sounds and, pitches, frequencies that, we can hear when we're younger, but as we get older, maybe in a span of like 5 or 10 years, we can lose certain hearing on certain frequencies, like, the high pitch ringing of a television. Some people lose that. They can't hear that. Like Mike, he can't hear.
I've seen
can hear
videos on YouTube of that where it claims if you're above a certain age, you won't hear the tone that they're playing, that only younger people can hear it. So I guess there's some science behind that. But this wasn't the sound of a cat, but the sound of kittens mewling.
Yeah, that's
it
what I
was
was
very, very
thinking,
small, very young
kitten.
kittens. And my dad had a similar thing, kittens in his past too. When he was a child, they had an old cat there on the farm that had kittens. And I guess the mama cat didn't take very good care of them, and they passed away. They put them in it was either a hat box or a shoe box and buried them down by the creek. They buried it down there because the ground was soft, and had a little funeral for him and everything. But he said for years after that, when they went down there to that area of the creek, they could hear those kittens. And the first time they heard it was not long after they buried him, and they thought, oh my God, did we bury him by mistake? And they dug him up, and they were very, very dead. But he said they heard those kittens for years down there where they'd buried him. So
I love the stories about.
I think animals, they have a spirit that lives on as well.
About dogs after they pass. People have the collars on them that make jingling sounds, and they can hear the dog approaching, that their bell jingles or whatever they have on it, their little rabies tag and things. But after their pet passes, they think, oh, I hear my dog coming. And they're like, wait, I don't have my dog. Their collar's hanging up there, but they still hear that jingle. And it comforts them because they think, my pet's
that's very cool.
coming to
I've
say
heard
hello.
stories of people that would see a dog outside that they used to have that they either didn't have anymore or it was deceased. They'd see it going around the corner of the house or walking into the woods or something, but they never could find any actual dog.
I recall a story that happened to me a few years ago up at my mom's, and the show I was on with you on your YouTube channel, 13 Past Midnight. I told you, you said it was your favorite story I had told you. I was outside. It was dark. We were talking about something, I forget what. And I'm looking ahead. My eyes were adjusted to the darkness. I'd been outside for, 30 minutes or so. There was an outline shaped of a deer. It was like a thin, smoky, white, gray, maybe a hint of blue color. It come from behind a tree and just really quick zoomed across and went behind her shed, her outbuilding. Now, so that's how it moved. Its position, though, was like it was in mid jump already, and its front legs were like tucked just a little bit tucked under. And, if you imagine a deer when it's jumping, it's already going to have, the force behind it. When it's, it jumps, it's going to tug its feet under and it's going to, just travel. Well, that's all I saw. The deer was already in motion. I didn't.
Yeah, I remember that story. And you said it was moving like that with its legs under it, like it had like jumped, but it wasn't
like a float on a
mid-flight or anything, just floated by. Now they have like cases now, what they call not deer, something that people see in the woods that looks like a deer, but it's not a deer. And I've heard stories. I heard a story of one guy, a truck driver, that had pulled over on the side of the road, and he watched a deer come down like a grassy hill. It got to the guardrail. He said it turned into a man, stepped over the guardrail, walked across the road, stepped over the other guardrail, then changed back into a deer and bounded off into the woods. Now, what on earth is that?
That's the time when I would think to myself,
or a shapeshifter, or who knows?
I would think to myself, nope, this is not a Kodak moment. This is not a photo opportunity. It's time to punch that gas.
He didn't waste any time getting out of there after that.
I'm going to straighten some roads out. Yeah. Oh, the kicker on the deer story. My mom drops her head when I told her, I stood there for a few seconds thinking about what just happened. I just saw, and I'm like, just face it. I'm not crazy. And I saw that. And I'm awake. It happened. Okay, deal with it. I tell my mom what just happened. She ducks her head, drops her head. Like she's avoiding me. I'm thinking, great. Mom thinks I'm nuts. Well, she goes to go inside, and I'm on her heels. I'm like, I'm not crazy. You don't believe me? I saw that. Blah, blah. She said, no, I believe you. I said, you do? She said, yes. I saw the same thing last year. She said, don't know what it was. I haven't saw it since. She said, it's just an outline of a deer in the same spot, just disappeared behind the building.
Now, what, if anything, did you ever find out that represented? Do you feel like it was a sign or an omen? Did anything memorable happen after that to either one of you, or is it just
I thought it was
one
pretty
of those
cool,
strange occurrences?
I didn't feel like it was ominous or good luck or anything either, but it's just, I thought, well, maybe some Native Americans, Native people had been hunting there, and maybe something was replaying, like the stone tape theory.
Yeah.
I don't know what else it could be.
That little part's stuck, and it just keeps playing over and over and over. And there are repetitive hauntings like that.
It wasn't like it just come bounding down, jumping. It was just like it was frozen and just really quick floated across. I mean, when I say float,
like maybe it was shot in mid-flight. Maybe it was shot in mid-flight, and that traumatic sudden death, it left an imprint there, and the deer's still trying to jump away.
The audience is trying to, envision what I'm saying here, so I'm trying to be accurate.
Yeah, just imagine a deer in mid-leap, and then it's moving like that. It's not running, it's not walking, it's just leaping literally forever. And I asked my grandmother about stuff like that, because sometimes there's stuff you see that it doesn't have any sign with it or any meaning or any interpretation behind it. I told her about an apparition that I'd seen that I never did make any sense out of. And she said, well, sometimes you see things that are meant for you to see. Sometimes you may witness something that's meant for another person to see, and you happen to see it. And she said, sometimes you just see things that doesn't mean anything to anybody, but there it is. So that's the best explanation. I ever heard of that, of the unexplained things that you see, that all the times it's not an omen or a warning or a sign of anything.
It's just for you to know, to have that experience. And, you rather become a believer, or you block it out, you ignore it, and go on about your day. But
yeah. No, I try to be skeptical and look at things and eliminate any kind of scientific explanation for it. But there's some things that just aren't. There is no explanation.
Yeah.
And I think a hardcore skeptic is just somebody that hadn't had the right experience yet. But even a lot of people will tell you they don't believe in ghosts, or they don't believe in this, that, or the other. And then they'll reference that with, but there was this one time. Everybody's got some kind of story. They may be in denial that it was something of a supernatural nature, or maybe it wasn't, who knows. As Charles Fort wrote, one measures a circle beginning anywhere. So anything you look at like that, you're going to come back around. And there are things that there's no explanation for.
I loved, when I was a kid, hearing the grown-ups talk about spooky things. My mom said Scooby-Doo was my first love. And I don't know if it was because of the dog or the paranormal, or maybe perhaps both.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe both. And I think things like that, paranormal shows, that's a lot of kids' introduction to that. With me, it was fictional shows like Night Gallery, but then also shows like In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy. I grew up on those. Our local PBS affiliate in East Tennessee played those. And it wasn't always something spooky or paranormal, but it was something strange. Sometimes it would be earth science or an unsolved mystery or something like that.
I found a love for it before it found me, before I ever had an experience, I've always liked the scary movies and the horror genres, paranormal
books of ghost stories, true ghost stories. I mean, I can enjoy a good made-up ghost story. There's a lot of those in the Victorian era. But I love a good true ghost story, things that supposedly happened. And the ones I really enjoy are the one-offs, the things that you only hear about one time, maybe a couple of times. The Mothman, the Flatwoods Monster, the Dover Demon here in New England. Things that were witnessed by maybe several people over a short period of time and then never seen again. Although I think Mothman, people still seeing him. I think they're seeing him around Chicago or something now, according to some stuff I've read.
Now, people say that seeing the Mothman is a omen to warn you, or it could be an omen because he's the harbinger of, bad
Yeah.
things to come.
Well, we just covered that in a video on Among the Missing. We were talking about frightening things, creepy things along the Appalachian Trail and surrounding areas. We covered the Mothman encounters there in Point Pleasant, Virginia. And just prior to the collapse of the Silver Bridge into the river there, that's when they started seeing Mothman. There were people that claimed to have seen him that day around or maybe even on the bridge. And when I premiered that video, there was somebody in the chat that said that they didn't like the Mothman and that they'd always had a dream since childhood of a bridge collapse. And they lived near that area. And they were the 13th child. And I think they were born on the 13th. And the rivet that they identified on the bridge that caused that collapse was the 13th rivet. And this person said, I think maybe I perished in that bridge collapse and then was reincarnated 2 months later. They were born 2 months after the Silver Bridge collapse. So something to think about. Food for thought. Who's to say?
I like those odd statistics. That's one in a blue million. I mean,
Yeah, and a lot of stuff I like that. I don't even believe in coincidence.
yeah,
I think there's synchronicities.
that's arranged or something. Yeah, that's too much at once to be.
You call it kismet, divine intervention, supernatural. Now, my brother was a Pentecostal minister, and I asked him about the paranormal and the supernatural, and his explanation from a religious standpoint was one of the most interesting I've ever heard. He said that when you consider everything that's natural, he said those are man's laws that are used to measure that. But if you believe in the Bible, everything that we consider our normal was spoken forth out of the supernatural. He said there's going to be things that you can't explain that bear description. And that makes sense if you look at it from that standpoint, that the laws of science and the laws of nature and the laws of thermodynamics or whatever, those are all things, the law of time, physics, things like that. That's things that we've come up with, theories that we've come up with to explain things. But there are things outside that realm that have no explanation. And from a religious standpoint, I think that was a good analogy or a good way to describe it. My opinion only.
I mean, when you've examined and cross-referenced everything possible, what's left that, what other possibilities that are left is paranormal, supernatural, natural, a religious experience, or, and all of those are still part of the woo, as people say. It's still, you can't explain it. It can't be proven. It can't be disproven. It's in a class on its own.
Some things, they just are. It just is. And
maybe we're not
can't
to
be
know
explained away. And maybe it's better that we can't.
Yeah, I mean, imagine the world if all the mysteries were solved. It wouldn't be any fun. I mean, you wouldn't have.
It'd be a boring place, I think.
Yeah.
For people like us,
really
especially that love the supernatural and the paranormal, the strange, the odd, the bizarre.
Yeah, and people look at you, think, well, you're into all those ghost shows. They think of you like you're some witch, wizard, or warlock, like you're this dark person sitting around in a dungeon all the time with ghost books and tarot cards and dark candles. No. We're still happy people. We're still loving people. We just love getting into a good
appreciate the dark. We're nyctophiliacs. We love the night. We love the darkness. And like here, I mean, we've got our Halloween decorations and stuff up, but we've had them up for months. A lot of times I don't even take mine down. And I appreciate it that Nicole appreciates all the dark things like I do, because that, it takes a special person to enjoy all that stuff. But like Saturday, we went out and went to an old cemetery and strolled around that in the rain. That's our idea of a good time.
Yeah, I love a good fall day with the colorful leaves and the sun shining through just right. But there is still something tragically beautiful about a dark, gloomy day, mist in the air, trees crooking just a certain way. It's almost poetic or something. It's
beautiful. And it was that way here in New England. Earlier this week, there were days that it was overcast, it was cloudy, it was gloomy, it was foggy and misty. And we love it. That's our favorite kind of weather.
It's peaceful, too, in a way. It's kind of like nothing can penetrate that. It's still. It's not disturbed. Your vision can only go so far through the fog, and it's just like a little picture. It's beautiful, I think. Now I do have a couple more 2-story house
Okay.
episodes to tell about.
Please. Continue.
I almost got tongue tied. And also, I'm sure the audience too finds a lot of things beautiful that others probably wouldn't. I mean, if they're listening to this, they probably interested in ghosts and supernatural and things.
Literally everything out there.
The more
That
the
was why I
merrier.
named it that. I want to cover anything strange, odd, unusual.
Yeah, that's me. I want a YouTube channel one day. I want to cover anything supernatural, paranormal, the whole aspect of it. Okay, but as far as my childhood in the 2-story house, there was one night when it was fairly cold, really cold. And we had electric blanket, and I wore glasses or contacts. And even as a child, I had to have glasses. I didn't have all my glasses, so I had to get down pretty close to the dial to turn up the electric blanket. And I almost fell out of the bed. So I put one hand down to brace myself. And I'm repositioning myself to look at the dial to go turn it. I believe it's on like number 4. I can see something start forming. It was see-through. I could see like a hint of color of veins, but I could see capillaries. It wasn't bloody. It wasn't fleshy. It was like just a hologram, doctor style image of what the inside of a hand would look like without the bones, just capillaries and stuff. And I could see through it. I could see the dial through it. And the dial turns. It goes to number 7. I go under the covers. And I stay under the covers. Probably till I pass out because I don't want to breathe because then I'll move and I don't want to move because this hand's going to come for me. But, I didn't want to tell anybody about that until a couple months later. I overhear my mom telling somebody that when they rented the house, that a lady had told her that there was a little boy lived with a family prior that lived there. And he always had trouble zipping his pants. And he come flying out of the room one day saying, he got his pants zipped. So-and-so helped him zip his pants. There was nobody in there. And I'm overhearing this. I'm listening. I'm like, this is cool. And the floor pops. I'm like, busted.
An extremely helpful ghost, one that'll zip your pants for you if you're too little to do it yourself.
Yeah. I mean, a little boy can't zip his pants is going to brag on himself if he done it. I zip my pants. But no, he claims somebody else done it that wasn't there. And I thought it was a pretty cool story as a kid. Later on.
Kind of gave me a chill there. There are helpful ghosts.
I loved listening to those stories. Later on, it was storming really bad one night. Like lightning every 2 or 3 seconds seemed like loud thunder. The windows were rattling. It was an old farmhouse. Well, I noticed the covers are kind of slowly being tugged away. I tug them and I feel a foot tap me. Me and my sister were sharing a bed when we was a kid. I think we just had one electric blanket or something at the time. It was cold and stormy that night, and she kept pulling the covers. I'm like, would you quit? She's tapping me with her foot, and she barely puts her finger up. It says, window. Do you see that? I'm like, no, you're crazy. Go back to sleep. She is literally like ready to burst into tears. She sees an old man covered with a blanket across his leg in a wheelchair. But the wheelchair is like the old wooden type that had the backboard on it would have like little tiny holes in it, some old pattern. And the sides of the wheels curved way up. It almost looked like those old style rocking chairs. And I believe she said he had like red veins or something on his face. And mind you, I had not told my story at the time about the hands and the veins. So I'm laying there. I don't call her crazy anymore. And I'm almost in tears. I'm like, okay, just don't look at it. Don't look at it. I never saw it, but she sure did. And she cried and cried and cried over it. She was afraid to go to sleep. She would sleep under the covers. She would jump, like how scared little kids do. They run and jump in the bed, they cover up, and that's it. They're under there for the night. But another story, let's see. Mike's had an aunt named Ruth. And years before I met Aunt Ruth, living in this 2-story house, me and my sister were in our room again another night. And we hear the loudest slam of a door I've ever heard in my life. It sounded like someone was literally down the hallway and fired off a round, Well, we quit our giggling and whatnot, whatever we were doing. We were supposed to be quiet and in bed asleep. We hear someone walking, but the walking was like a footstep and then a thump. A thump, like a boot, thump, thump, a boot. And then a thump, 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 thump. It goes all the way down the hall to the stairs, up the stairs, goes in the bedroom upstairs from one side of the room, walks back across to the other. We can hear it come across to the middle and stop. And all the while it's a thump, thump. We did not know what that was. We never knew for years. Still don't know what that was. But years later, when I met Mike's Aunt Ruth, we was talking about the 2-story house that I lived in. She said, yeah, there was a makeshift doctor that lived there. They called him Sawbones. He used to saw injured legs.
That's words you don't want to hear is makeshift
Right.
doctor if you're the one that needs to be treated.
Or if you might want to find another barber in your situation. Well, she said there used to be no rocking chair in there, and it was known to always rock. It just rocked any time of day, nobody in it. Luckily, we didn't have any rocking chairs like that or that very one in the house. So I did miss that, thankfully. But she said, yeah, he used to cut off legs, and, people would have peg legs and stuff. She said he cut his, he done his own leg. He injured his leg, and he had a peg leg, is what she said.
So he amputated his own leg and fitted himself with a prosthetic.
Something of that nature.
That's hardcore.
I don't know what he done to his leg, but he finished the rest of it off. The part that got me, though, is when she said peg leg. I thought
that would account for the thumps that you heard.
Right. You talk about like whoosh, tunnel vision. I'm thinking I had to pick my jaw up off the floor. My eyes were watering. Here I am, like 25, 30-year-old. And I'm like, I'm ready to cry. I'm like, are you serious? Are you serious? She's like, yeah, what's wrong? What's wrong? I said, peg leg. We heard a door slam when we was kids in that house. The thump, thump, the thump, thump, up the stairs, back and forth. That's what we were hearing was the peg leg, the wooden leg.
And you had no foreknowledge of what had happened there or who had lived there.
No,
Amazing.
Never had heard that. She said, well, yeah. She said, you didn't know that? Everybody knows that house was haunted. I'm like, what? You're freaking me out, just a little bit. But I asked her if she had any more stories to tell after I calmed down a minute, because it was pretty wild. It was cool. I was very interested in anything else she had to say at that point. She didn't have anything else to tell me, but yeah. There was a man who cut off limbs, injured his leg, cut his leg off. Now, he may not have fitted himself. Maybe I'm wrong with that part. But he had a peg leg, a wooden leg. They called him Sawbones. Well, Sawbones came and paid us a visit when I was a kid. That's all I know. There was nobody. I mean, we could hear the noise, the footsteps and the wooden leg thump go by our doorway, and we're looking. There is nothing or anybody visible that goes by the door. So
I'm
we just
wondering
laid
if the man in the wheelchair
froze.
that was there, if that was one of his patients.
That made me think about the chair she said, too, that, I would always rock. I was thinking, well, maybe that was what my sister saw, was that him in that chair. Maybe that was the same chair. And she said he had red veins, and then I saw the red vein hand, and I'm hearing all these things about the doctor, his name, the wooden leg. Everybody knew the house was haunted. I'm like, whoa. It's just like finding out.
You didn't know it was haunted until you did.
Right. You never know. You never know what your four walls.
And I think there's places where the ground itself is haunted. You can build a new house in there and still experience paranormal activity. It doesn't have to be somebody that's lived there in that dwelling.
No, it can be brand spanking new. You can have haunted objects or
Mhm.
even people. People can be, they can carry negative energy or even positive energy.
Well, I've
People-
thought about that. Every house that I've ever lived in was haunted to some degree, experienced some form of
Yeah,
activity.
it's
And
you probably.
just recently, a few years ago, it occurred to me that maybe it's not the houses, maybe it's me that's haunted.
Yeah.
Maybe stuff just follows me around, or it's able to manifest because of whatever energy that I give off, or whatever my grandmother thought I had.
You're
Frightening
open
to think about,
to
but
the things like
I'm
that.
not
So
complaining. I enjoy it.
being open to it may allow, kind of like a magnet or a pull. Your energy's friendly to them. Like, hey, we got a buddy here. Instead
I've
of
heard
like,
people say that you're
somebody
like
else is totally
it's
against
like
it.
moths to a flame or whatever, that they
Yeah.
see you and know that you're open to it, or that you have perception of things like this, and they will flock to you.
Yeah.
Interesting
if
theory.
they would have a message or something, maybe they see you as a potential, as bait. They want to use you as a vessel, Hey, maybe we can get our story out or message out or let somebody know what happened to us. I find those stories very interesting too about
Yeah,
like,
and it makes a good degree of sense from a
Um,
supernatural standpoint. Well, Cathida, I want to thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you for being my guest on Everything Out There. And we've talked a little bit of everything from the deep south there, superstitions, haunted houses, places you can go, places that we've both lived. Fascinating, fascinating stuff. Thanks once
love
again
it. Thank you.
for being my guest.
Anytime, Steve.
Well, friends, there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this peek into the strangeness of the Southern Appalachians. And I hope you found it true. The Southern Appalachians possess an aura of mystery and intrigue. Beyond their breathtaking beauty and serene landscapes, these ancient peaks have long been associated with tales of hauntings and supernatural occurrences. From eerie legends and ghostly apparitions to unexplained phenomena, the Southern Appalachians embody a spooky nature that continues to captivate the imaginations of locals and visitors alike. These old mountains are steeped in a rich tapestry of folklore and legends. These tales, passed down through generations from people like my mama, give rise to the spine-tingling ambience that envelops the region. Stories of witches, shapeshifters, and haunted houses abound, leaving an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of the mountain communities. From the mysterious Brown Mountain Lights to Sensabaugh Tunnel in Kingsport and beyond. These have fascinated people for centuries and defy scientific explanation. Now, the Southern Appalachians do bear witness to a turbulent past, providing fertile ground for ghostly encounters and haunted locales. From the abandoned mining towns that echo with the whispers of lost souls to the decaying remnants of forgotten homesteads, the mountains are rife with places that evoke a sense of eeriness. From the infamous Bell Witch legend originating in Adams, Tennessee, where a vengeful spirit terrorized the Bell family in the early 19th century, its presence lingering in the collective memory and serving as a reminder of the spectral mysteries that pervade the region, to the strange goings-on in Cades Cove and the North Shore of Fontana Lake in the Smokies, things that just can't be explained. The ethereal beauty of these very mountains itself is a source of intrigue. With the dense forest, the mist-laden valleys, and hidden caves, they create an otherworldly atmosphere that lends itself to the supernatural. The stark contrast between the vibrant fall leaves and the encroaching darkness of the deep woods evokes a sense of both awe and trepidation. As the wind whispers through these ancient trees and the mist clings to the mountaintops, one can easily imagine the presence of unseen forces at play. There's been many accounts of paranormal experiences by those who've traversed the mountains. Hikers have spoken of strange disembodied voices in the wilderness, while campers have reported unexplained footsteps encircling their tents at night. Some even claim to have encountered ghostly figures or felt a chilling presence in certain areas, as if the mountains themselves are alive with this spectral energy. Now, whether these encounters are the result of overactive imaginations or genuine supernatural phenomena, the allure of the unknown persists. In conclusion, the Southern Appalachians possess a charm that goes beyond their natural splendor. Their spooky nature, born out of legend, haunted history, and enigmatic landscapes, weaves an intricate tapestry that draws both the curious and the intrepid. Whether exploring the winding trails, listening to the hushed whispers of the wind, or delving into the rich folklore, one cannot help but be immersed in the mystique of these ancient peaks. The Southern Appalachians stand as a testament to the enduring fascination with the supernatural, inviting us to embrace the enigma and embrace the shadows that lurk within these depths. Again, I want to thank you for joining me on this episode of Everything Out There. I'll see you next Sunday night. And I'd also like to thank, once again, my guest, Cathida Katt Gray. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll see you a little farther on down the trail. Have a good night.